Newquist, and welcome to this Gusto's Facebook Live broadcast on tax reform, overhyped or underhyped. Like I said, my name is Caleb Newquist. I'm the editor-at-large of Gusto. And please don't call the police. That child does belong to me. She was not a hostage, but that's me. And I'm here with this lovely panel, and we're going to talk about reform, and so I'm going to introduce them to you now. First, we have Andy Smiles, creator of andysmiles.com. She's based here in San Francisco. Next, we have Kenji Kuramoto. He's the founder and CEO of Acuity in Atlanta, Georgia. And last but not least, we have Will Lopez, founder and CEO of advisorfi, out of Palm Beach, Florida. Thanks for everybody for joining this broadcast in this conversation we're going to have about tax reform. But first, before we get started, I need to say a few words so the lawyers off screen will stop glaring at us. And that is lots of things we're going to talk about here today. We'll deal with tax law and the tax code, regulations, revenue rulings, all kinds of stuff. We aren't your lawyers. We aren't your tax advisors. And so none of the stuff that we say here today should be taken as legal, financial, or tax advice. So if you're unsure or if you want more information, please consult your own tax advisor before you do anything. All right, so now that we have that out of the way, I guess I'll just give a little bit of background for those who aren't familiar. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act went into effect in December 2017, so it was just over a year ago, and it was the first major piece of tax reform legislation in over 30 years. It cut tax rates for virtually every business and individual taxpayer across the economic spectrum. It eliminated or limited a lot of popular deductions, and it added a lot of new wrinkles too. So it was very complex, it was wide-ranging, it was hyped by a lot of politicians, and it was covered widely in the media. But more recently, as people have kind of been looking back on it, there's been some doubt about its effectiveness, and also even the awareness among small businesses. And that's what some of the things we're going to talk about today. The law was passed very quickly. At the time, it was just under 2 months, and it was around the holidays. So it seems reasonable that maybe a lot of people didn't hear about it or aren't very familiar with it. So with all that background in mind, it raises the question, was the tax reform bill overhyped or underhyped? And to help answer these questions throughout the session, we have these little paddles, overhyped, underhyped, and our panel here is going to interject with those throughout the session today. So, all right, everyone, tax reform, overhyped or underhyped, what say you?
I would say
we're
underhyped.
saying it out loud.
Okay, yeah, no, you're allowed to speak. I'm not the only one talking today.
I thought the paddle spoke.
I was, we kicked around the idea of only me talking and you all have to talking just with the paddles, but no, it seemed like a bad idea. Anyway, okay, underhyped.
I would say
Again,
underhyped.
I'm the lone overhyped, but yeah. So let's get started. We're hearing from our panel, and Andy, we'll start with you. Underhyped. Why underhyped?
I think it's underhyped mostly because I don't think the average small business owner really knows that much about the new tax law, and especially if we think about the fact that it was passed basically a year ago. Mm-hmm. A lot has happened in a year, and people who run businesses, they have a lot on their plate. They're not thinking about the tax law in all of 2018. So I think whatever hype and press it got at the end of 2017, early 2018 has sort of fizzled out. And
okay.
People are now coming back to like, oh yeah, taxes.
Yeah. Will, Kenji?
Go for it.
You go first.
Okay. Yeah, I kind of feel like it's a little bit of both. So I mean, I couldn't obviously show the middle side of this because you wouldn't be able to read it. But I feel like it's underhyped in the sense of kind of its far reach and affecting everyone entirely. And I don't think everyone understands that it affects everyone. So not a lot of people are aware that it affects everyone from individuals all the way to corporations. And then I think it's also a little overhyped in the sense that whether or not it's going to kind of like add fuel to a burning, raging, let's say, deficit or something like that. Mm-hmm. I mean, obviously it was passed with intentions to cut taxes and create jobs, and that's still to be seen. But for the majority of things, I feel like it's underhyped. When I take like Lyft drives and I go on Ubers, I really make an intention to ask the drivers who are part of like a gig economy, right? What they feel the tax reform does to them, and they have like no idea. They said this has nothing to do with me.
Right.
And so that's kind of, I feel like, the general impression of the reform, and maybe because it was passed so quickly, and there really just wasn't a lot of promotion of it, that I think it was just one of those things that everyone knew passed, but has no idea that it affects them.
Yeah. Kenji, what do you think?
I guess first of all, have you seen your Lyft and Uber, rider rating plummet as you've been pestering all these drivers with like tax?
You've got to be a
questions?
1-star.
Yeah, that's
totally
gotta be
a
a
one-star
driver.
That's brutal. That's a little brutal, but
I'm surprised you can get a ride.
Yeah, seriously.
Yeah.
Oh no, here comes the tax guy again. We got to listen to this again. But no, I think I'm in agreement too on. I think it's mostly underhyped because it really does look like this is going to be very, very good for the most small businesses, and there should be some extra tax savings for most people compared to the previous kind of tax legislation. So that's probably been a bit underhyped. I think, like Will mentioned, on the overhyped side, I kind of feel like, and I think we may get into this in a little bit, but like tax cuts are going to be there, but whether or not this actually creates a job stimulus and actually adds jobs, I'm not surprised that that's in there from maybe a political standpoint, but that whether that'll really take hold or not, that may be a little bit overhyped.
Well, it's kind of a question too, isn't it, that the economy is doing pretty good right now, and there was a lot of, not to get into too much of the economics of it, but some people feel like we already have a good economy. The tax cuts were supposed to kind of be an extra kind of boost, and some people don't really know if it really needs a boost right now. And so the timing is kind of a question too. But I guess one thing I want to ask all of you is, why the lack of awareness? We mentioned that the bill was passed really quickly. You mentioned that small businesses really have a lot going on. What do you all think as far as lack of awareness or lack of understanding among small businesses? What is that mostly, what mostly led to that?
I mean, personally, I think there's a couple of things. One, I think just in general, a lot of small business owners, money stuff is out of sight, out of mind until you have to deal with it. And now we are finally coming into the point where we have to deal with it, because now we're like in tax season, but we weren't really dealing with it for most of last year. And I think the other thing is, to be honest, like I've read a lot of the articles about, the new tax law, and they're not accessible. The language isn't accessible. It's confusing. There was a lot of conflicting information out there. Someone was saying one thing, another person saying another thing. There's a lot of speculation, and it's hard when you have 5 minutes to read about this stuff, and you can't even get through an article without having to Google everything in it.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I agree, and I think that also, I'm probably the oldest one, I'm guessing, sitting here, but the last time you mentioned, Caleb, it's been over 30 years since there's been a change in, in what and how our tax legislation has worked. It's been a long time. I think that's hard to kind of wrap your head around. I know that last time this changed, I was still living at home with my parents, like I said, so I don't think many of us know any other way besides what we've been used to from a tax standpoint. So like you mentioned, Andy, now we're in tax season. We're about to find out what this really means. So I think in all of that, it's been a little bit hard for people to kind of conceptualize and wrap their head around what this is going to end up meaning for them in the future.
Yeah, and I would agree. I think for the majority of Americans, money is out of sight, out of mind. And generally during tax season is when you do see the fruit of any kind of legislation come out in dollars, in real dollars. And so I think probably after this tax season, you'll probably see a little bit more of awareness out there because, I think a lot of Americans will see the fruit of the tax reform. At my firm, almost everyone is going to benefit from the changes in the reform. So, and not to get into the economics part of it, but do any of you follow NFIB? NFIB is the National Federation of Independent Business, and what they do is they take a lot of economic data points from small businesses, and they produce a quarterly report, really amazing to read. And they produce what they call a specific number, and it's called the Small Business Optimism Index Rate. And it's a specific number that's supposed to mimic how optimistic small business owners are. And the rates hit its all-time high in 35 years back in, I think, Q3 of last year. So in August, September of last year at 108. and it's currently hovering at like 104, 105. The lowest it's ever been, down in the low 80s, around 2009, I believe. And then when the reform passed, NFIB showed a huge spike as far as small business optimism. And their index rates, it consists of a lot of things. Compensation, salaries, inventory on hand, even job creation optimism, whether or not they plan on hiring more. And so, I don't know if we're reading a lot of content out there at the moment that's indicating that small businesses are bringing on new jobs. But as far as the index rate or the optimism of what's going on with the economic landscape of this potential reform, it's very, very optimistic at the moment. And I think that as tax seasons kind of go past 2019, 2020 start to happen, I think there'll be a little more awareness as far as just cash, because the more cash you get, I think you'll be more aware of the reform.
Interesting. So one thing that we haven't mentioned that I'll just ask as a kind of a bit of a follow-up is, everybody here is an accountant of some measure. Why haven't businesses been hearing from their accountants? Or maybe that's the question I'm asking. Should businesses be hearing from their accountants about this? Would that have helped with the awareness? Does it seem like there's I don't want to say a failure, but maybe I am saying a failure on the part of the accounting community to educate their clients about it?
Yeah, I think
present company excluded, of course.
Yeah, exactly. We're totally on top of the ball. I think, for the most part, because I think there was a lot of conflicting information out there on the reform early on, I think professionals were probably still wading through a lot of that data. And it depends on the practice as well. If the practice is very proactive, let's say if they provide tax services or even whatever kind of service, if they're more proactive about how the reform is going to impact you as far as bookkeeping is concerned, with meals and entertainment, or specific deductions that are now fading away, if that's a value added that they're providing, I think a lot of firms would jump that direction to just show value. But for the most part, firms and taxpayers are just trying to figure out what is happening, what actually occurred, and how's this going to affect my clients.
I will take the bait on that one.
Okay.
I'll say that. And I do think there has been a challenge in this. I think we hear a lot about this. We decided at our firm to actually go ahead and launch a tax practice this year. And really a lot of that, we have not wanted to do that. We've been around for a long time, have tried to avoid doing taxes. We just kept consistently hearing over and over again from clients of ours who we were doing bookkeeping or other services for, that they just did not have a relationship with their CPA doing their taxes. There was no proactive nature to it. And they kind of just wait and hear it, right in tax season about what they need. And there's just not any kind of communication stream going. So yeah, I think there's a bit of a failure there. I think it's important that CPAs and tax professionals, even while we're still trying to figure this out, because like we talked about, none of us exactly know how all it's going to flush out. It doesn't mean we can't be having conversations with our clients, because there's certainly more, the small business owner is more stressed out about this than we as tax practitioners are. Mm-hmm. So we should be having those conversations. I do think there's been way too slow for the profession to move on this.
Andy, what do you think?
I agree completely with Kenji. I feel like a lot of tax preparers and CPAs don't have a really personal relationship with their clients. And I have a lot of clients who work with different tax preparers or CPAs in whatever capacity. So I see a lot of the relationships between a lot of different groups of people. And it is amazing to me how they are not proactive at all. And sometimes, even though it's not technically my role, I'll mention things to them to ask their tax preparer about. And I'm like, I don't think I should be telling you to ask these questions. And really, truly, your tax preparer or CPA should be telling you these things or asking you these questions. Do you know about this? Do you know about that?
Good. My friendly crew has just reminded me that we are posting survey questions during the broadcast, and our first question is up now. Yes, it is up now. Yeah, it is up now, and it is. The question is, do you think the TCJA, or that's the tax reform bill, the shorthand, the intent for the tax savings to create new jobs? Do you think it'll work? Yes, no, or maybe you don't know what we're talking about. You just joined and you are really confused. But anyway. Please answer those questions as they kind of pop up through the broadcast. We really appreciate your engagement. My next topic of discussion for the panel is about the qualified business income deduction, and what this was popularly known as the 20% pass-through deduction. It was widely covered in the media. For those of you who aren't familiar, I'll try to give a little bit of background without boring you to death. But a lot of lawmakers, when they were early drafts of the bill, it was felt that it was too friendly to big businesses because there's this big corporate tax rate cut, which was I think definitely overhyped. But anyway, so in response to that, they developed this QBI deduction, or this 20% pass-through deduction, and that brought some of these other lawmakers who were pushing for small business incentives into the fold. So, and what it does is it allows pass-through business owners to deduct 20% of the income from their businesses. There's a caveat, though. There's lots of caveats, but one key caveat is that it cannot be a specified service, trade, or business. And then there's also some income thresholds, and it gets complicated quickly. But the main point is that this was supposed to be a really big boost for small businesses. That was the purpose behind including these provisions. So my question all to you is, this QBI deduction, is it overhyped or underhyped?
That one's hard.
That is hard.
Oh, unanimous?
Are we
Are
in
we
agreement?
unanimous?
I think we
We're
are.
in a
Yeah.
unanimous agreement.
Cool. All right. So let's talk about it. I mean, so I covered this issue quite a bit and read lots about it. It's extraordinarily complicated. I think a lot of the coverage had to do with the risks and the possibility of gamemanship and stuff like that. But for a brick and mortar type business, manufacturing business, small business that is either in retail or something like that, there seems to be a really good opportunity here, or to be eligible for a deduction and save some, to have some tax savings and put that money back into your business somehow, either giving your employees raises or maybe offering health insurance. I don't know. I mean, what do you all think? Would love to hear your thoughts about it. And yeah, Kenji, we'll start with you this time.
Got it. Yeah, I agree that it's been underhyped. It seems like, I think some of the discussion has been around all the different exceptions. And I think that's been, especially around the types of services you can do. And it's probably not a place to deep dive here because there's a whole bunch of stuff out there about what types of business you have to be. And I think that got a lot of attention and maybe distracted from the fact that by and large, really a large group of small businesses are going to be eligible for this deduction, even though there's some income thresholds. But it's really trying to kind of get there to be a little bit more parity between the more standard and typical small business entities, and also along the parity with the big, usually s-corps, which are kind of the bigger company entities essentially. So I think that's been underhyped and maybe just missed out a little bit because everyone's trying to figure out, well, what about all these exclusions and why are those in there? So that's been my take on why it's been underhyped. But it should be for most small business owners something they should be really looking forward to, and would be one of the primary drivers why under the new regs they'd be seeing some savings in some of their taxes.
I'll say that when you look at it in context, small business in general is about half of the economy here in the U.S. Small businesses provide more than 80% of the jobs here in the United States. So when you look at it at the context of that, and including some piece of legislation that has reform that benefits small business owners, and this really is, I think what's underhyped about it too is a lot of people thought that the tax cuts really were for big business. And it really wasn't. It was really meant for small business pass-through entities. If you have a partnership, s-corp, a little Schedule C or something like that. Because if you make too much, it goes away. And too much is defined as something like, anywhere between $200,000 and $400,000. That's too much. And so it's really meant to give a break to the small business sector that really do provide a majority of the economy, a majority of the jobs. And back to Kenji's original point, whether or not it will create more jobs by taking those savings and kind of passing them along is yet to be seen. NFIB really, what's interesting is in NFIB's reports, in that National Federation of Small Business, that index rate, the majority of the tick up on the index rate is actually reinvestment into inventory. And so what you're seeing, I feel like what you're seeing out there is you're seeing small business owners getting more cash, and then what they're doing is they're reinvesting and trying to grow the business further. it's underhyped in that sense. Once again, gig economy. Gig economy, I think, is really huge. It's becoming really huge. You know, Airbnb, Uber, Lyft, Fiverr. These gigs that you get yourself into, it really affects those kind of people. Selling things on Etsy, selling things on Amazon. I mean, that is a big chunk of our economy. And I feel like it's really underhyped, especially around the gig economy as well. I think a lot of giggers out there, people who get themselves into gigs, really don't understand that this reform really is meant for people like them,
Sure.
or at least it definitely includes them. They're part of the party, you know, but they don't realize that they are.
Just to give some context, I got a couple of stats. The Brookings Institution, says that about 95% of businesses in the U.S. are pass-throughs. Tax Foundation puts it around 90. So anywhere 90 to 95%, like you say, big chunk of the small businesses are these pass-throughs that we're talking about. And also the gig economy, the most recent stat I was just reading this morning, I think it's about 12%.
That's
Something,
big.
which is, and it was 10%, I think, I don't know, I think 2014 was the last time they measured it. So you're right. Andy, want to include you also. Any thoughts about the pass-through deduction?
Yeah, so I read this question about underhyped, overhyped in terms of how excited small business owners are about it, in terms of like their personal feelings and like when they file their taxes. And so the reason I chose underhyped is because I have sort of tested the waters with some clients and self-employed friends to see how they feel, and they just feel like it's this really vague idea of like, oh yeah, there's this like 20% thing, and it kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier, is a lot of them are relying on their accountants to figure that out for them. So they're not really even anticipating a savings or excited about a savings or thinking about a savings, because to them it's all just something that's going to happen when they file their taxes, and whatever's going to happen is going to happen.
Yeah. Okay, so raise another question. Has the accounting community done enough to educate themselves about this particular provision? I get the sense that to hear you talk about it, probably not. Again, because you seem to be proactive, but it sounds as though maybe, I mean, there's some people that really, like the tax experts out there that really follow this stuff closely. They might be on top of it, but in general, is the accounting community, have they gone as far as they need to, or what sense do you get from talking to your colleagues and partners?
I would say that's probably why you opened up a tax practice, right? I think we see some really lucrative opportunities down the pike as far as assisting small business owners and pass-throughs. I do believe that there isn't a lot of content out there that really breaks down this 20% deduction in a very chewable way, you know, a digestible way for professionals. I think you're absolutely right, Caleb. I think there's a lot of provisions inside of it that make it really complicated. But I think as accountants, we naturally we overcomplicate things too. We try to fixate on the potential or the what if, when really what we need to do is just kind of hone in on the generalities of things. But for the most part, there aren't a lot of easy, attainable, digestible courses or CPE programs or things that you can get yourself into to continue your education in how this particular aspect plays out. I think from our clientele base, what they're hearing from like our firm is that they have a chance to save money. I think that's the general gist. Okay, what you're saying is I'm going to claim less money as far as taxable income. For the most part, yes, it's an additional deduction kind of thing, and it's a sweeping generality. And so I think for a lot of people trying to get into the weeds, it's just way too hard.
Yeah, I think that's a challenge that we've had as a profession. Is we love to get in and kind of really nitpick the technical aspects within the profession and kind of go deep there and kind of look at the code without thinking about really it's the small business owner who is actually the client. So a lot of the stuff I've seen about it has been, you know, either regurgitation of just the code, like you mentioned, or I think Andy, you mentioned earlier about who's out there actually spending time talking to the small business owner in their language. The stuff I've seen out there typically has been around lots of all the different firms and accounting, you know, subject matter experts talking in really specific technical terms that are really only conversations that are happening within the accounting community and haven't been shifted over to happen within the small business community.
Exciting updates to share with you all. You've been answering our survey questions on your screen. Thank you for doing that. And if you haven't seen the results, for this question. How much did you hear about the QBI deduction? 11% said a lot. 54% of you have responded a little, and 35% have literally no idea what we're talking about. So over a third of the respondents are completely in the dark, and so I don't know. We're not going to point fingers here, but
You're not alone.
Well,
Yeah.
can I add to this?
Yeah, please,
Because
yeah.
I think this becomes a conversation too about, is it about the accounting community educating ourselves about this law, or is it about us educating ourselves about our clients and how to speak to them in a way that really makes sense to them, and how to share this information in a way that's accessible to people?
Yep. Okay, so next topic. What would you, if you were going to give a theme to this tax season or busy season? I know you're not a tax preparer. You're brand new to it, so I don't know.
So, Will, this is your question.
Yeah, don't know if you know what you're doing, but in any
Probably
case,
not.
what's the overarching theme here as we kind of we're going into this tax season? Our government isn't really operating at the moment, but we'll set that aside for now. But what's the overarching theme here? I mean, Andy, when we've had conversations off camera, I mean, you had a nice way of summing it up, so maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah, so my theme is, this is not the year to DIY your taxes. I think out of any year, this is really the year to seek out a professional. And I would even add to that now to really spend your time finding a professional. If you don't already have someone that does your taxes for you, to research people and interview people and find someone who you feel really comfortable with, because we're talking about language and we're talking about information and we're talking about proactivity. And so if you're going to enter into a relationship with somebody who is filing your taxes and you're depending on them to help you save money, you want to be sure that's the right person. So that also means not procrastinating.
Mm-hmm.
Start looking for your tax preparer now. Don't wait until April 1st.
Okay, Kenji, Will?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, yeah, this is the year to not DIY your tax returns. And if you are DIYing it, then I think this is the year that you should add at least 2 more questions to your question list, and just simple things like, how does the tax reform affect me personally? I mean, that's a simple question that's very vague enough if you're working with someone, or if you're not working with someone, to really ask the people that are preparing your tax returns to see if there's anything out there that really specifically impacts you. And if the answer is yes to that, then you probably should just drill down a little further and just say, what in particular of the tax reform affects me personally, me and my family? And I think in 2019, I think for a majority of us, it's going to be a learning curve of the reform. It's going to be, what is in particular affected my tax refund or my tax bill? And they may find out 1 or 2 or 3 things tops. And I think in 2019, what you should do is write those down, set them aside, and do a little research, dig into it a little bit. You don't have to figure out the whole reform, and I think that's what happens is you have this big piece of legislation that's huge, and the past 35 years we've never done anything like this, and you look at it and you think like, whoa, that's just way too much to digest. Well, don't do it like that then. Then just pick 1 or 2 things that may interest you and dig into it and see if there's anything in there that really impacts your family.
Yeah, I think the theme is opportunity. If you're a small business, it's very likely you're going to have a lighter tax bill. So it should be exciting to think about whether there are opportunities to either invest in your business. So that should be exciting to you. I think the second one is really out to, again, the accounting community, especially tax preparers. There have not been any changes in decades. So you finally got a change. You've got something to actually engage your small business clients with. This is a great time to be having a conversation with them. So even though there's a lot of questions, I would just say there's great opportunity to lean into all the change, and at least it brings it top of mind in a way that you can kind of spend time communicating with your clients. So I think there's a lot of good things amidst a little bit of the chaos and a little bit of the challenge there. There's a lot of opportunity for folks.
Okay, so we have to do our little vote. So tax prep help, overhype or underhyped, I think. No, we're all kind of on the same page. All right, lovely. And also, our next survey question is on your Facebook live screens now. And our crew is dancing or something, I don't know. But this is the survey question dance that's going on. If you have tax savings, if you're a small business and you have tax savings, what are your plans for them? Will you give your employees raises? Will you invest back in the business, inventory, or maybe big ticket items, shopping spree, maybe you'll hoard it, I don't know, whatever you think you will end up doing with those savings, let us know. All right, last question I have, and I don't know, we'll see where this goes, but you know, we're already in year 2 of this new law. It's amazing how fast it's gone. You know, we have the tax season to get through, and we'll kind of take that experience with us, both businesses and accountants. I'm going to ask you all to kind of do some, I don't know, crystal ball gazing, I guess. But what do you think the future holds in the wake of this new law? I mean, we're just kind of getting started, so I'm just curious to think, what should we be looking for the rest of this year, but then in 2020 and beyond?
Well, the reform is only planned for 10 years, right? So we got 10 years to live.
Especially the small business,
Especially the
pieces,
yeah, right.
specifically, right?
Yeah, specifically the small business pieces. That's a really hard question. I think only reason why is I think there are a lot of variables that impact the answer to that. One is economically. You know, you have a reform that I think is very, very good for business, very good for taxpayers, and people who don't even own businesses. So very good for just individuals and families that give them potentially more money, which will, for the most part, you know, typical for the American consumer, spend, right? So we go on a spending spree. So will that just add, you know, a raging fire to a deficit that our country has overall? Plus, I mean, a lot of people call the reform irresponsible as well, and I will give credit to that. You know, a lot of people are concerned about the reform because it's not going to give the guys much money, and there's a lot of spending going out there. So if you're not making much, but you're spending a lot, that's a problem. And so,
right, the tax cuts were supposed to pay for themselves, and so far there's really no evidence of that.
Right, no evidence of that. There's a lot of optimism that people are going to use all that money and do a lot of things with it. So there's that one aspect of it. For the most part, I think probably in years 3, 4, maybe 5, I think we'll start to see really its true impact. Obviously, the markets are raging, right? So the stock market's raging, hitting all-time highs. You know, the small business optimism index rate is at an all-time high. So there's a lot of indicators at the moment that, like, economically, we're doing really well. People are really stoked about what's going on. Whether it's going to stay there and last, you know, is really, I have no idea.
Yeah, lots of variables.
Lots of variables there.
Just early returns from our survey question. 5% say they will give their employee raises. 68% plan to invest it back in their business. 5% are going to go American and go shopping.
Excess max.
And then the 21% say they're going to hoard it. So those are...
You know what's interesting is NFIB really is touching on that point too. NFIB really, their report indicated that a lot of small businesses are going to reinvest. And that's really interesting that even in the survey, that's also being stated. But in NFIB's fourth quarter report, that was like the overarching theme. It was reinvestment. So,
Andy, what about you? Will you be starting a tax practice over the next couple of years, or what?
I will not be. But I think for me, when with this question, it's sort of more of a hope than what I think, like a crystal ball gazing, which is I hope that because this is a big change, this is an opportunity for people to become more proactive about their finances, to become more engaged with the money in their business, to learn more about their taxes, and to be empowered about learning more about their taxes. I hope this acts as a catalyst and that we start to build those engaged relationships with our finances.
Kenji, are you prognosticating?
Sure.
Something wild? Something?
Why not?
Yeah.
No, I think in the short term, I would still expect to see, because this will be the first time we're going to get some filings actually out there and going to get some responses back from Uncle Sam about this looks like. So I think this year I can still see people being fairly conservative, trying to kind of figure out and kind of deal with what the new reform looks like. I think over the long haul, though, I'm still pretty optimistic. I tend to have, and maybe it's being an entrepreneur, small business owner, I do have a lot of faith in entrepreneurs and small business owners. So I like reform that puts more income back into small businesses and entrepreneurs. I just think that even get more broadly, as a country, that's kind of our DNA, is being very entrepreneurial. So I like seeing legislation and help go back to small business owners. I don't know what that's going to mean, but if that continues, I feel like that'll be good for the overall small business community.
Great. Another survey question should be up on your screens now. And the question is, do you believe tax reform has had a positive effect on your business? And your answer options are yes, no, or not sure. So please choose one of those and we'll report back with some stats in a second. I want to go back to this point that you made about starting businesses. I think you're right. It isn't uniquely American entrepreneurship, but there is a certain American entrepreneurship does have a certain mystique, maybe, or the possibility. And I'm just curious what you all think in general about this bill as it relates to entrepreneurism. Do you all agree with Kenji that it will kind of bring more people that are kind of thinking about starting a business? Do you see more people kind of going that route? Or with kind of the volatility in the markets and maybe some uncertainty in the economy, especially over the next couple of years, will we see people kind of resist?
I mean, I personally believe that anybody who's kind of like been on the fence about starting a business will be more than likely to reconsider staying on the fence. That is, I think they'll get off the fence and they'll actually start something. For one of two reasons, I think. One is if the reform doesn't last longer than 10 years and it gets, let's say, replaced or taken away, especially, let's say, the small business benefits, then all they've done is they've missed out on an opportunity. So that's one. And then I think, secondly, I think what you're going to see potentially a lot of wowing from small business owners saying, whoa, this reform really did help me. I really did save. I really did reinvest. I really did do this and I really did do that. And other people are going to say, they're going to get the FOMO fear, right? The fear of missing out. And they're going to go at it. They're going to start a business. They're going to try an entrepreneurial endeavor and try to figure things out. So I think people will get off the fence for one of two reasons. One is the FOMO that they would get from seeing other people trying and let's say maybe slightly being successful. And then secondly, I think you'll see professionals getting better and better at communicating that there are a lot of benefits in the reform, and if they do well, that it may not last forever. So I think that'll encourage people to kind of get off the fence a little bit and get in the game.
What do you think, Andy?
So I personally don't think people start businesses based on tax reform, but what I do think is that the tax reform will make having a small business easier, which will then make it more sustainable for people to have businesses. Because a lot of people start businesses and it's hard. It's not an easy thing to do, to be an entrepreneur. And so the more financial incentive there is, the more tax incentive there is, I think it'll allow these businesses to get through those first, 2 to 3 really tough years and then like get up to a point of sustainability.
Yeah. I totally agree with you. I think that things like a better catalyst probably for entrepreneurship or things like the gig economy and side hustles as people have, that's probably a bigger way for people to kind of dip their toe into being a business owner. Yet I think it'll be helpful to your point about if there's also financial incentives around taxes, that's great. I still think there are other motivators that'll help too. So it'd be good to see those kind of work in conjunction.
Yeah. Okay, some results from our most recent survey question. Do you believe tax reform has had a positive effect on your business? And 18% have said yes, 12% no, and 71% are not sure. So yeah, it's early in the game, and so that seems about right.
And I think like the tax reform isn't like a picture that you post on your Facebook that gets thumbs ups, thumbs downs right away.
Well, that's
you
right.
know, like it's not one of these things that you immediately see like the reform working through your business, like something going in through your bloodstream. And so that absolutely makes sense to me. And I think that's where I think it'll take several years before people can probably look back and be able to answer that question with a little more confidence of like, well, maybe not. No, I didn't see really any big impact. Or, yes, I did see something. One year I saved a little bit of money in taxes and, that's the only thing that really stuck in my mind kind of thing.
I want to come back around to the accounting community, and I know we have some accounting viewers or accountant viewers out there. What should, as you're all firm owners or firm owners, what should accountants be thinking about in the years ahead? I mean, I think we focus pretty closely on small businesses. Do y'all have any opinions about accounting firms and what opportunities lie ahead for them?
Getting into the tax practice business like you did.
No, you don't want to do that. No, it's too crowded. Okay.
No, I think accountants are going to learn. Obviously, they're going to dust off the monocles, right? They're going to get into the research business and figure out how this reform really affects them. I think we've been kind of like peddling the same knowledge skill set for the past 30 years, and now this reform is going to get us out there and kind of like we're going to flex our muscles a little bit more, brain muscles, and I think what you'll see from the accounting side is you'll see firms question whether or not they want to get into this tax game, just like you did. Mm-hmm. And I'm kind of curious to hear whether or not the reform actually encouraged that on your side, besides the individual loopholes yet. Not everyone knows how to implement the loopholes, if there are any, or let's say really provide some advice that saves somebody a little bit more money if they split their business apart from service to non-service or something like that. So I think you'll see a lot of professionals kind of rethink that a little bit.
Yeah, I don't think you have to be a master of deconstructing the tax code to really go out and help small businesses in this case.
Right.
For us, a lot of this started through just connecting with other peer firms and just talking about what they're doing to think about how to address this for small business clients. And I've always found that it's one thing I really love about the accounting community is we are very helpful to one another. We talk to each other about what things and practices we're doing. I think that's something that more tax professionals need to take advantage of. Talk to other firms about it. Run some scenario analysis. I know that's as an accounting kind of geek. To me, being able to see what the old reform looked like, the old tax practices look like compared to the new reform are very helpful. So just do some of those. Talk to peers. Run some scenario analysis. There's a lot of tools out there to let you do it. All the new tax software is updated for all the new codes. So you can put some scenarios in there and take a look at what it means for your clients and at least get that process going within your own firm and own practice. And I think, again, if you run into questions, there's probably a ton of other professionals out there who are going through some of the same challenges. You can absolutely bounce ideas off of.
Andy, what would you say to like a firm owner like yourself, somebody who doesn't specialize in taxes, but clearly has a core set of clients that you obviously do a good job communicating with? What would you recommend to those firm owners who are kind of in a similar situation?
Well, in terms of opportunities, I think that there's a huge opportunity for financial education products. I think that that's a really big area, especially with digital products and having so many platforms for digital products right now. I think that's a huge area that you can explore. But I think also, what retains clients and what gets you new clients is having those personal relationships with your current clients. And even doing more education work with your current clients. We've talked a lot about being proactive with your current clients, reaching out to them. I think you mentioned at one point in another conversation we had that you ran scenarios for your clients.
Yep.
And all of those little things will help you grow your practice.
Any final thoughts? We're kind of wrapping up as far as our questions are concerned.
We have a few questions.
We do have a few questions in our comments, so I think we're going to address those live on the air, so that's exciting. So
OverHyped. No, UnderHyped.
UnderHyped, right? Yeah, questions UnderHyped. So, Mohini,
Yes.
shout them out. Or...
Sure. Here's one question from our viewer, Callie. She's wondering if there's any clarification yet on whether passive rental income qualifies for the deduction. I don't know if any of y'all would have an answer to that.
I mean, I would say the reform, so that 20% deduction does apply to real estate, real estate property. I don't recall whether or not the passive or non-passive is an issue in that particular aspect of the reform.
Consult your tax advisor.
That's right. Consult your tax advisor. But I think just from general memory, a pass-through is considered anything where the company itself doesn't pay federal taxes but passes through down to you. And so, real estate rental properties, Schedule C's, Schedule F, which is a rental, the property worksheets, things like that, will all qualify for that. I think in the code, in the tax reform, really where the stickler was whether or not the business that you have is service-based versus non-service-based. So, the benefit of the reform phases out a lot earlier. It basically goes away a lot quicker, as a service-based business. So I do accounting, that's a service-based business. If you have a non-service-based business, like selling widgets on Amazon or selling whatever, the code is more favorable for someone like you than it is for someone like me. So I don't believe there's anything that, in my mind, that really kind of falls on the passive versus non-passive on the rental property.
Nope.
Okay.
Next question.
Next question.
One other question I think is just for all of y'all in your practices. How are you planning for a manageable busy season?
Ooh.
About to go into that.
Andy, you want to go first?
Yeah, knowing that it's a busy season is the first step. But really, really understanding that it's your busiest time of year in the next three months, and scaling back in other areas of my business where usually I scale up more. And also, I did something this year where in December I began to collect as much as possible from all of my clients and gave them really strict deadlines, because knowing that this tax season would just be a little bit busier with the tax reform and everything. So I think getting as much as you can as early as you can, because if you have clients, they're laggers, and that it takes a long time to collect things from people, and that can add on to the stress of having, multiple projects and clients that you're working with at once.
Yeah, we actually, through talking to a lot of other peer firms out there, when we built up our tax practice, one thing that we were very specific in doing is that we are not going to take on tax clients who we don't also have an ongoing relationship doing some other accounting services with. We just didn't feel like, and that's a relationship, one time a year coming in and dropping off tax returns. For us as a firm, that makes it incredibly difficult to staff. We don't get a chance to work with you and kind of help advise you throughout the year. So a lot of that came from good advice from other firms who've kind of been there and done that before. But that's one way to really throw a kink in your busy season. And I know that as firms, we're always trying to grow, so it may seem like it's a good idea to take anybody who comes and knocks on your door and says, I'll pay you whatever to do your tax return. I would just caution you to think about, is that going to work from a staff perspective? Are you going to crush your staff with that, with a bunch of clients who are honestly just trying to be one-time clients who are going to come and not have an ongoing relationship with you? So we're hoping that strategy of being on a more recurring basis with them helps kind of mitigate a bit of that huge spike that typically tax practices go through this time of year.
Yeah, I would say I think you're going to get hit in two different angles. One is an announcement of the reform angle. That is, if you've not communicated the reform to your clients by now, I think what you're going to get is a slew of clients going, so what's up with the reform? And how's this impacting me? And I think you're going to get yourself into deeper, longer conversations during the busiest time of the year. So that's one way. And then the second thing is maybe all the DIYers getting off and actually having tax preparers going to tax preparers to have them do tax returns. For me, announcing the reform early on was really big for us. Because, I was very excited about it because I just wanted to see monetarily what it was going to do to my clients. And so I remember when the reform passed in December of 2017, Wall Street Journal rolled out a really cool calculator that let you drop in some figures. And I think in the 2018 tax season, we were taking people's tax returns and dropping them in this Wall Street Journal calculator thing. And even then, when we were talking about their 2017 return, we were already having conversations about 2018 and the tax reform. So, but that doesn't solve, let's say, the DIYers coming to us. So I think if you're kind of thinking ahead and you're thinking about, let's say, 2020 tax season, I think you should, for a lot of tax practitioners, should be really proactive in 2019 in making the announcements to their clients during, let's say, tax conversations or 2018 tax conversations. Try to get ahead of the communication, I think, and I think it'll fare well for you.
Great. Yeah, we have a quick follow-up from Alex who asked the previous question. Are you using cloud-based tax software or desktop tax software?
We were really, again, starting brand new from scratch. That's, for us, we were like cloud only. I mean, we felt like it's certainly time where we need to cut the cord on desktop software. It's kind of a little bit, I think, embarrassing as an industry, as a profession, that we still have a lot of desktop software out there. I'll say that we were very fortunate in being able to build it kind of in the modern era where we're like, guess what? If it's got to, live on a desktop or a server somewhere, we're not going to use it. So yeah, we had the luxury at least of not bringing on legacy clients and starting new, so we went all cloud.
Cloud or desktop?
Yeah, I mean, cloud if you can help it. But tax preparation is one of those antiquated industries. I mean, it's just there's not, for whatever reason, well, not for whatever reason. We understand what it is. It's just our industry likes local desktop software. So therefore the manufacturers or the vendors just don't innovate, right? They don't get ahead of that. They don't try to help lead the industry.
They're not being asked. I mean, they're not innovating because we as a profession have not been asking them to innovate.
Correct.
So that's
Yeah.
It's not just on them.
And
it's
they've
on
not
us.
taken it upon themselves and said, you know what, maybe we should help.
lead.
We should help the people who use our software get into the cloud. So, I think it's kind of like what comes first, chicken or the egg kind of thing. But yeah, if you can do cloud, I mean, we do cloud. Well, we don't have a true cloud one. It's a remote desktop. We use Pro Series, and which is an Intuit product, yes. And but and we all remote into it. So we if you can do cloud, I would definitely do cloud.
Yeah.
If you can help it.
Awesome.
Yeah, Andy, what do you?
I
You're
don't
not a
file
tax
taxes,
preparer.
but
No, you're
if
so
I
smart,
did-
but you're
if I did, I would say cloud
Yeah.
as well. I mean, I think just at this point, like you said, we're at the point now that we really shouldn't even be having the
I know,
conversation. We
yeah,
should
It's
just,
a little,
yeah. I
You're
would
never
say
late
cloud.
to the party. Let's just say
Come
that.
on.
If you're just coming to cloud, it's okay. No one will make fun of you. Just
Show up.
everyone's happy that you're here.
So we have one last question from Trinity. It's a bit of a doozy. Does the 20% pass-through raise the threshold where becoming an S-corp is advantageous over being a sole proprietor?
I can answer that.
Yeah.
So,
You've been waiting for
so
this.
just one more time, so I make sure I understand
Yeah.
the question. Go ahead.
Does the 20% pass-through raise the threshold where becoming an S-corp is advantageous over being a sole proprietor?
No, it does not. No, it does not, because a pass-through is not just one kind of entity. A pass-through is anything where the income or the losses pass through, and there are various entity types. They call them tax classifications. And so like S-corp is one of them, partnership is one of them, Schedule C is one of them, real estate property is one of them. So if you're a sole proprietor and you want to move S-corp, the threshold doesn't go up just because you go from one tax class to another tax class. What changes the threshold is the kind of business you run, service versus non-service. So that changes the threshold. Also, what changes the threshold is your filing status, single versus married filing jointly. So those kind of things change the thresholds, but not moving from one particular pass-through to another. Not tax advice, by the way. I'm just
Yep.
kidding.
Consult your tax advisor.
I think that this question is a great example of how tax situations are so unique, and this is why we are recommending, especially this year, to go see a tax preparer, because everyone's tax situation is so different based on a lot of different factors that we can't all talk about right now and go through.
Yeah, and your entity, I mean, whatever entity you are, just be mindful that's not just a tax decision. So don't let the old tax tail wag the dog there. There's a lot of legal reasons for having the right entity too. So don't forget to think about that side of it as well. That what's the impact of just the entity going to be on my tax return? But think about too, making sure you've got that proper protection from a corporate entity as well. So there's some legal ramifications to take into account before making a switch. And entity changes are very, very difficult to go back on. Once you make them, they're very difficult to change. So that's not something you should be too willy-nilly on. So just take caution with that.
That's a good point, because there's a lot of coverage in the media around the time there was the question, because the C-corp rate was going down to 21%, a lot of people got their eyes got bigger than their stomachs, and they just thought, 21% tax rate, maybe we should become a C-corp. When you're right, it's like, by the time you go through it all, is it really worth it? Like some of the analysis that I read about, like some businesses were going to save maybe $1,000 by changing. It wasn't going to turn out to be worth it. So it's a really good point.
I will say though, just to kind of throw the cherry on top of that conversation, I do believe that if the majority of your income personally comes from your business and you are a sole proprietor, you should talk to a tax professional and consider other pass-through options like S-corps, because you can save money. So while the thresholds and the reform doesn't affect you personally in that regard, going from sole prop to S-corp, there are other factors at play that will save you money, because changing the way you have yourself taxed, you know, the more you have to manage and more administrative effort that is caused in that change, the more chance you have of saving money. That's how I kind of equate the two. Is, you know, when it's easy to run a business, that means you're generally paying the most in taxes. When it's a little harder, a little more administrative work to run a business, then generally you're getting yourself into this area where you have an opportunity to save more money in taxes.
Side note, Andy wrote a really great article on Gusto's Framework blog about this very issue. So I think it's being dropped into the comments right now. So if all this sounds good, check that out. And yeah, we've got a couple minutes left. Any closing thoughts from anyone or everyone? I mean, it's been a really great discussion. I really appreciate everybody's time. And it's, you know, I remember, you know, when I started Going Concern almost 10 years ago, tax reform was this thing that people just kind of bandied about, and they were always talking about, it's like, wow, we really need tax reform. We really need tax reform. People talked about it for years and years and years. I really didn't think I would ever see it. And then it got thrown together in 2 months. And now it's really interesting to see the opportunities that have come out of it, but also, you know, some controversy. There really is, it really has been an interesting thing to watch develop, and now we're putting it in, accountants and small businesses will start putting it into practice, and so it is a really interesting time. And like you've all been saying, lots of opportunity to, you know, for you all, run really great accounting firms to help small businesses, but then there's also some opportunities for entrepreneurship too.
Yeah, I mean, my closing thought is, I would say it's gonna. I think for a lot of taxpayers, it's going to take some effort to get knowledgeable on the subject, considering that it's not a subject that's being talked about because of all the other stuff that goes on in the media. So it's like going to a party and all you're seeing is cake and cookies, and you're like, I really want to go for the vegetable the platter. You know, like it's really hard to actually pick up that carrot from the veggie tray when you have all this other stuff distracting you. So my closing thought is, you know, if in your mind you have some inkling of wanting to learn a little bit more, I think it's gonna cause a little more work for you to go find it, because it's not something that's really being talked about. And with everything else just overwhelming the conversation, it's something you're gonna have to go out of your way, find some resources. Gusto's website has some great resources. Like I run a YouTube channel and I try to do like videos on this topic. So it's really hard to pierce through the noise that's going out there, trying to find the golden nuggets to try to educate yourself. So you're gonna have to like muscle it through, I think, a little bit in 2019, 2020.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, we still don't really know everything about this new tax law. We're still learning because we are now finally filing our taxes for the first time under that tax law. So you may not have immediate answers. It may not be that, you know, in the next 2 months, you're going to know everything you need to know and how it impacts your business. We might have to still wait and see as things evolve.
Yeah, it's not every day that our profession is in the national news as prolific as it has been. In fact, it's been over 30 years probably since there's been this much discussion about it. So again, lots of opportunity to get conversations going within the community and with clients in particular. So just use that. It doesn't mean you have to have all the answers. I mean, some of this, to your point, it's our first time doing it, like Andy mentioned. This is going to be an evolving process over the next 10 years. But boy, what you don't want to do right now is sit back and be hunkered down and not communicating with clients. That's going to be a real problem going forward. So I mean, I'd use it as a great way to reconnect with some clients you maybe haven't spoken with in a long time.
Great. Well, we have to end it there. That's a wrap for this Gusto Facebook Live event on tax reform. I want to thank our panel, Andy Smiles, Kenji Kuramoto, and Will Lopez. Please check out their websites, andysmiles.com, acuity.co, and advisorfi.com. Check out Will's YouTube channel. I know it's been dropped in the comments. And if you're a business owner and you haven't worked with an accountant before, please check out Gusto's partner directory and find yourself an accountant in your area. And likewise, if you're an accounting firm and you're looking for some new small business clients, go to our partner directory and get yourself on there. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Clear?
We're good.
All right.
Yeah, we're good.